Welcome to another episode of Living with FASD Podcast, Candid Conversations with Patti Kasper. That's me, and I have both professional and living experience with FASD, which makes this show just a little bit different from any of the other wonderful podcasts out there. So this show is for those who are living with the effects of prenatal exposure to alcohol, their family and loved ones, and also for anyone else interested in learning more about FASD. Today, we have Ms. Antonia Lindsey with us again, and we're going to be talking about art therapy and communication. And welcome, Antonia. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Thanks, Patti. Thanks. It's my pleasure. It's always an honor.
Yeah, thank you. So, Antonia has been in the field of FASD for decades, probably as long as my entire career, whether it's been addictions, mental health, or child welfare. So she truly is an expert and a gem. And as I've said before, she's probably the best kept secret from that first wave of professionals in FASD long ago. So it is truly my honor, Antonia. Can you talk to us a little bit about how art therapy can be useful in helping those of us with FASD, whether we are adult or child?
It would be my honor. It would be my honor. And what I can say is that if we were to think about art as a container, kind of, because art as a form of communication, we have speaking, which is auditory, but art is visual or tactile, sculptural. And we can think of it almost like, okay, we're trying to have a good container for those times when there's something stuck inside, there's something difficult, and we're trying to either organize our thoughts or our feelings, maybe, by having a physical form to put things in. Sometimes people are offered, in therapy, they're offered journaling, for example. Well, this is a little bit like that, only it's on a visual 2D surface or in 3D media. So it becomes a form into which one can translate certain experiences, internal experiences, thoughts or feelings.
Yeah.
And if we
especially
look at
if the words are hard to find.
And there we go. It goes back to, how does picture talk work in a way? Because that's sort of what it is. If a person is drawing or a person is sculpting, they're putting things in form that could go into the form of words, or maybe they just need to come out of the body in this way first, tactily, manually, and visually. And after that, we can kind of look at it and go, how did that come up in my body? What do I do with it? These things can be explored. And that's how art therapy is actually kind of useful. Some people use it as a way to self-calm. Other people use it as a way to try and get across to somebody else, this is where I am. It feels kind of like this to me. So it has interesting utility, this bucket of art therapy. It could be used, the expressive media continuum is a big range, and it could be used in many different ways depending on what a person might need.
Can you share with us an example or two
from
your long, illustrious career?
from my ancient archive.
I guess I could point out that you are happily enjoying retirement in the land of France.
I am in retirement, and yes, I am really, I'm glad to be here, and I sure do like being in a place where there's a little more sunshine, because I'm in an old, decrepit little body here, and being in the sunshine feels kind of good.
Yeah. So, and you were up in Oregon, right? When you were here in the States, and there's not a whole lot of sunshine there.
not so much beautiful moisture and lovely green and so many things that I love and I still miss, but my physical body it wasn't holding up very well in that situation,
Yeah.
and had to find a warmer place to put myself for these next few years.
Yeah.
So that was it.
So the other thing I will mention to the audience, more the viewers than the listeners, for those who follow on Pocket Casts or Google or Audible, but for those who are watching, whether it be on Spotify or YouTube, Antonia is deaf. So that's why you've seen her hands flying as she speaks. So she came to deafness late, which is why why she's so fluent verbally. But it's kind of nice to have, both languages right there.
Thanks for saying that, because I forget that it's not necessarily very typical for people to have their hands moving all the time. And for me, it's just been a way that I've always been, and now it's even more specific because there's some ASL-isms in the middle of my my chatting. This is chatting. This.
Okay. I have always been one that says I talk with my hands, but more like we think of Italian women, right? Or Italian people, just right.
It's a good thing. I think it's a good thing.
And meaningless gestures on my part.
Sometimes there's body wisdom that's kind of that kind of comes about. There's a kind of a logic in the body. So going back to this logic in the body, whether we're showing pictures with our hands or we're showing pictures with media, there is this thing that happens in the body where the body expresses stuff. And if we go ahead and try and build on that and trust it, I think it's really valuable. I think it's valuable. And I've seen it be a profound help to a lot of people who had various differences. But in this specific example, let me use one example. We talked about the boy who made the mouse with the bristles, the porcupine. In this case, I'm thinking of a woman that I really learned a lot from, who was living with FAS. She was an adult, and she was in her early 30s and had a lot of the challenges that we think of on the ACEs measure, the
adverse childhood
experiences scale. And so she was really a resilient person and a tenacious person who had some of the hard things that the literature talks about, and we don't always see those in everybody. This one was one example of what many people would think of as some of the hardest stuff that people can have happen. And yet there she was, going through life and regrouping. She was in a residential setting where she was recovering from a lot of hardship, but she was doing a really courageous job of that. And there were times when her case manager, the case manager had gotten in contact with me because I'd done a presentation about fetal alcohol syndrome at the local university. And this woman was working on getting her MSW, and she had this client. And when she listened to the presentation, she was like, whoa, bells went off in her head. And she was like, there's this one client. I really want to see, what can we do? And so that's how I became involved in the situation. And as an art therapist, I was just working on this aspect of trying to help her have workarounds when stress would just blow her up. Now, when stress would blow this young woman up, the kind of stuff that would happen is that she'd confabulate stories, the kind of stories there were all kinds of wild stories that would be told. And the thing about that was, it wasn't that she was deliberately lying, the feeling about what she was experiencing was intense, and the words would come flying out that she felt really endangered by what was going on around her. So this case manager trusted that this woman was in pain, not deliberately trying to get over on people, con people, or do something terrible to other people. She was in pain and didn't have a way to process that exactly. So she might take other people's things. She might bolt out of the residence and be gone without authorization. Basically, back to the streets where it wasn't safe. And it put her living in the residence at risk, because if she would be gone longer than a certain period of time, it threw everything off. It threw in things into a real conundrum for the staff and for her. So the case manager was looking for, how can we organize what's going on with her? Can you get in there? Because I can't often make sense of what's going on with the words. Here's an example. One day, the case manager said, look, I've got a real problem going on. There's a conflict between this young woman and other residents, and she's being accused of stealing other people's food. We can't have theft. We can't have theft of personal belongings in our setting. We can't have it. And so client came in. I'll call the client Annette. Annette came in. And what we did was we pulled out 2 sizes of paper. There was a small size of paper that was like an 11, a copier sized white paper. She liked to work a little bit bigger. And so she pulled out an 18 by 24 inch sheet where there was room to move her arm, not just her hands and fingers. Okay. And she began by making this very large shape. She chose, out of the media that one can draw or make marks with in the expressive media continuum, she chose soft chalk because it was less constricting and less difficult for her hand, because she had hand fatigue. She had hand fatigue. So she used this soft pastel, or sometimes oil pastels, because they would smoothly work across the paper surface. And also she could control them. She could smudge them if she wanted. She could use them more expressively than just a pencil. Okay. But they weren't as uncontrolled as paint. So they offered her a little more control, but also some expression. And over time, I learned what kind of media seemed to work for her body. So this is what she chose that day. She made this big form, and the form had within it, it had an outline like this, but then it also had things that looked like a bullseye, and various forms that looked like almost gears or levers. And she said, there's a wall in my brain. She was getting stuck for words. Now, what a word picture that is. There's a wall in my brain.
As soon as you did the circle and then gears within it, I'm thinking that's got to be her brain drawing.
It was her brain drawing. Exactly. There we go. There we go. How eloquent is visual language? Because sometimes we can sort of show what thoughts or feelings are doing, even if we can't quite put into words everything about the sensations going on in our bodies because of that. It was efficient.
And that dovetails right into a very common parenting practice, where if your little is kind of stuck, can't explain something that's causing distress, the parent says, show me.
Show me.
Show me.
Show me. So if we keep, for instance, we keep some paper handy in 2 different sizes, or we keep some plasticine for littles, or some air dry clay, and we keep it handy, and we say, show me.
Mhm.
People can pick between something malleable like this, or something they can draw with,
Mhm.
or a whiteboard. Sometimes families keep a whiteboard now at home. That can be useful too.
I use a whiteboard with my mom because she's hard of hearing.
There we go.
Yeah.
For so many reasons, it's
Yeah.
really great having these simple little workarounds
Yeah.
tucked away in the cabinet. It doesn't take a lot of room, but wow, can it make a difference
Yeah.
when stuff needs to come out that isn't always working here. So yeah, so back to that brain image. The thing was, I looked at that bullseye and I went, how? Oh, wow. That's some, looks like there's some pressure there. And she immediately wanted another piece of paper. Well, guess what happened with the next piece of paper?
The bullseye got bigger?
It blew up on the page. And it was incredible because then, yeah, exactly. She took the paints and she made a huge outline again, which is a real sign of strength for an art therapist. When we see a person, put a border around something, sometimes that's an effort to contain something that feels big to them. It's a very interesting signal, and it shows a lot of strength in the person because it's not just the edges of the page.
Mm-hmm.
They're actually saying, this is so intense, I'm going to try and put it in this visual bucket here. I'm going to try and hold it. This is what it is. But she did it. And in paint, she made this bullseye bigger and really intense. She literally exploded it on the page, and it looked like a black and red striped target almost. Mm-hmm. And then what came out after she was done, it took about a half an hour, another half hour. So this was an hour and a half session. But she said this, she was breathing. She could get her breath again because her breathing was constricted. She couldn't take deep breaths. She was so uncomfortable and so agitated and so tense. She couldn't even breathe. And then finally, after she painted and that bullseye came out, she was able to lament about this person she was having trouble with. She was in a personality conflict with this other resident who kept accusing her of doing things. Well, she felt really targeted by the woman. The woman didn't like her and would kind of pick on her. And she felt really targeted by this woman. She made this huge big bullseye. She felt targeted. Okay. What an eloquent thing to be able to unpack that with art, because that's kind of a hard concept to say, I'm feeling bullied. I'm feeling targeted by this resident, by this, I can't get along with her. I don't know. I don't know how to handle it.
So where did you take things from there?
Well, we figured out that she figured out, I watched, she breathed, she unpacked, and we said, okay, so is it lots of people bullying you or just this one person? It was this one person. And so then I was able to help her get back to her case manager and say, for a particular period of time, let's make a moratorium. They have to go through you. They have to have a mediator. They can't have direct contact, these two. We've got to keep everybody feeling safe first. It was about restoring a sense of safety first before you do any negotiation about what or who's doing. Both people have to feel safe before you can even have a conversation like that. Next time she came in, it was a week later. And what she wanted to do was, as part of that safety, let me back up. I sent her home with the big pad of paper and the oil pastels and some chalk so that she could do bullseye drawings anytime she didn't feel good. Anytime the stress started to build up, she could do bullseye drawings. And she would keep doing the bullseye drawings until the colors in those pieces of artwork grew lighter and lighter and lighter. So it was a change in the intensity of the color and the vigorousness, the pressure of the emotion. She would literally calm herself down by doing wind down drawings. And what happened in the art? She brought him in within the next week. What she brought in were pieces of art in which she started out with a bullseye. Then she moved to a next piece of art where there was a bullseye and several bullseyes around it, and they got lighter and lighter and lighter. Mm-hmm. Almost like a set of mandalas.
Yeah, yeah.
And those mandalas became calming activity for her. And she began to use mandala art as a way to self-calm and breathe and take care of her emotion without needing someone else to hold her together, but just using that process to relieve her pain. It's pretty effective and pretty useful stuff.
Yeah.
And what a good way to take care of herself. Right. It was really great. Yeah. She began to do various things like that to really help manage when she felt overwhelmed, which is, it's not picking fights in the unit. It's not taking other people's stuff because she feels less than or put down. It's not getting in trouble. It's handling her own self-care in a really great way.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such a wonderful example. Do you have another one or two that you could share with us?
Sure, I do. Where that went, in fact, was she began to use the art with the bullseye symbol about stress load. The bullseye symbol, the target, became a metaphor for when things felt really bad for her. It became her code. It was her code, you know.
And that's something that all of us could benefit from, is having code language that we can use with those who are closest to us.
There we go. That's the perfect thing.
Yeah, because I mean, that's one of the central premises of your book, Parenting, you know, your porcupine, is the whole principle of stress load and how do each of us respond under stress.
And then what do we do to get a signal out to someone else when we're in our worst place? So that it doesn't get bigger, so that people can go, oh, wait, oh, you're there. Okay, wait, oops, stop action. Let's just, let's stay in neutral. Let's pull things out of intense gear, back it down to neutral, slow down, and see what needs to be done so everyone feels safe first. And then we problem solve in a way that is manageable, bite-sized and manageable, instead of more overwhelmed. So yeah, exactly. It's code.
I love that, bite size. Bite size. I think that's something that that we tend to forget, that we can do things in bite-sized chunks.
Well, there we are. Especially in oral culture. In deaf world, it works a little differently because our communication system is more, it's more a turn-taking system. We can't all be signing at once and see what each other are saying. We have to literally turn take. So it's different. And it permits a lot of options that aren't there in oral language, in counseling, given that most of the people that are going to be watching this are probably hearing people and speaking people. When we go to counseling, or when we're talking to our parents when we're kids, it's happening back and forth, and things can move really rapidly. When people are stressed, what do hearing people do when they're stressed? They talk faster or they freeze. You know, you can have one person deer in the headlights, unable to talk, getting more and more stressed and unable to verbalize it. Another person can be coming at them like a freight train with words and not understanding why the other person isn't responding. Like, don't you care? The other person gets a stonier expression and gets more and more stuck, unable to verbalize. The over talker and the under talker, if you will. The over talker is saying, doesn't this even register? You're showing a blank look. Don't you care? Don't you care? Well, it's not about not caring. It's overwhelm. It's like, enough already.
You're talking about me.
In the undertalker or the overtalker?
The undertalker. Yeah.
But you know, Patti, let's look at this. Anyone who sees the beautiful questions that you ask and sees you facilitate this wonderful podcast, would anyone ever guess that you get would anyone ever think that?
Yeah.
Would they ever imagine that you have that happen to you in your life?
Probably not.
Have they ever asked you, why aren't you saying anything?
Occasionally.
Not as often as might have been useful, eh?
Yeah.
I don't know. What helps in that moment for you? What code do you and loved ones have, or how do you have a code for when it's those moments?
I basically just stay shut down until I'm calm.
You know, I think that's what a lot of the people, it was what I saw the kids do, is what I saw so many adults do.
Mm-hmm.
They would either explode, in which case that really got them in deep, or they would just and try and get the heck away until the dust settled, because it was like a storm. It was just horrible.
And during that time, I often realized that whatever it was that caused the conundrum, isn't worth the attention that it had gotten, right? And you can just go ahead and fix whatever it was.
Which is incredible, which is incredibly wise and insightful. But I'm not sure that people who have inadvertently put you in that position were very generous about being able to avoid pushing up against you in that way or pressuring you in that way.
Yeah.
And not even know that you were really suffering, pulling away, trying to dial yourself back in. But that's not easy to do. That's not easy to do.
Well, I've had
I've
had 60 years of practice, eh?
Well, yeah, but gosh, here we are talking about what can people do when they really don't want to be in that situation, and they'd really like to have a way to get code across to someone else. Oops.
Yeah.
Back off, back up, something to say. No.
Yeah. And that's something that I often talk with the foster parents that I work with, or the adoptive parents that I work with, about what some kind of a code can they work out with their child to to be able to cue them about, this behavior's not cool. Like if they're maybe at a holiday party with extended family, a way of addressing a behavior that is not shaming.
Oh my gosh. So let's think about what my eyes are itching, which is why I took my glasses off. Sorry.
No worries.
I'm thinking about how the art could be useful in that situation. And it might be something simple like offering the parent. So when you're in these situations, have you ever asked your child, so show me what it's like in your body, using colors and any shapes you want, draw it any way you want, but show me what it's like when we're in that room full of all those people.
Yeah.
What's that like? What's that like?
Yeah.
What kind of colors is it? And then let the kid go for it. Just whatever way they want to go for it. And they will make something. Yeah. And from that, if an adult looks at it and says, instead of saying, we wouldn't look at the art, we wouldn't say, well, what's that? Avoid doing that if we can. But say, oh, wow. Oh gosh, what do we see? And you ask the child, What do we see? What do you see? What do I see? No, when I look at this, I see a lot of red there.
Mhm.
See if the child has anything to say about the color you just observed.
Yeah.
See if they want to add anything. Because that way instead of asking closed-ended questions,
Mhm.
you're asking open-ended questions,
Right.
eliciting, is there a story with this?
Yes.
What's the red line doing? What's that blue shape doing?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
happening?
And for
What's that like?
those in the audience who maybe are not familiar with the language of open-ended versus closed-ended questions. Closed-ended is anything that can be answered yes or no, right? Or like a multiple choice, or a forced choice question. And that's if your child is agitated about anything or has done something wrong, that you feel needs a confrontation, always avoid those closed-ended questions, because the purpose in that conversation, that engagement, the purpose is to explore, to
Yes.
find out information. And yes or no is not enough to be helpful in the situation,
That's so
and can
beautifully
just
said.
pile on the shame.
There we go. There we go. Thank you. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think the thing that art allowed me to do with the children and with the adults is it allows me to elicit their story. It allows me to elicit, show me, and then add anything you want to help me understand it. And it could be that I did it with deaf kids too. So it could be that we were signing, it could be that we were speaking, but they could add on as it came out from their bodies.
Yeah.
Instead of me having to corner them or extract something, it didn't work like that.
Yeah.
It came out this way. It came out emerging this way from the inside out, which is what we always hope for when we're asking questions in counseling.
Right. And that emerging is the key word.
It's really hard to elicit that. It can be, parents, when I think about the parents that I used to see, and I'm so glad that as you talk about what you do in practice when you're coaching, what we see is parents are trying, but usually this is the mechanism they're using is a lot of words. And when you have processing differences in receptive language, let's go back to the thing we were talking about before, about differences in receptive and expressive language functions in kids.
And adults too.
And adults.
Yeah. Yeah.
How useful is the back and forth of conversation? What's the pacing?
Right.
That might be comfortable or not so comfortable for someone.
Right.
How much speech do you want to put out there at once versus brief speech?
Yeah. And you raised several very important points right there. One, going back to the very basic premise that communication has several different skill sets. One of the things that I learned studying at Facets was they shared, as part of the training, they shared 4 MRI images that show the 4 different regions of the brain involved in communication. So in a classroom setting, for example, there was one image that was toward the front that processes visual, right? So the words on the blackboard or the whiteboard, or in the book, they get processed up front. And then as the teacher asks questions about that material, that's auditory. So that gets processed more laterally. And then there's another region of the brain, like back here, that is engaged in putting those 2 pieces together and then searching for what the response needs to be.
Yeah.
And yet a 4th part of the brain engaged in directing the mouth how to express that
The parietal
information
space.
out,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and with FASD, the linkages between those four could be broken or weakened in any one of those places or in multiple places. And that's going to really slow down, it's really going to add on to the amount of time it takes to process
Which
in a
is
conversation.
so beautifully explained. Thank you.
And
That is exactly it.
yeah, and then put that together with what you had said about when adults are stressed, they speed up their talking.
There we go. There we go. So we take that beautiful example you just gave, and we go back to how is art helpful? And one of the ways it's helpful is when you're in a situation, we'll go back to my office, the office I described in the previous situation that had the environmental modification options for it, the lighting and everything else. If we imagine people in there, if they're sitting, let's say it's a family, and each person has paper they're working on, they're busy not talking. They're showing, but they're not loading up a bunch of language processing at that time. Sometimes for 30 minutes. They're working away at communication, but it's not auditory and it's not oral and it's visual, so that it levels the playing field between kids and adults, because adults, at least, okay, I'm going to say something kind of controversial here. Do I ever do that? Do I ever do that? In North America, oh, here she goes again. In North America, there's not a lot of, we're not a culture that really gets the arts a whole lot and supports them a lot. We're not. Honestly, compared to Europe and compared to Africa and compared to Indonesia and a lot of places where art, they don't even have a word for art because it's just how people live, Anyway, won't go there. But the process of being involved in doing something that's showing instead of just saying, for some people, it causes discomfort for adults because they go back to how it was handled in their school days, where someone told them, no, you make a stick figure like this or you do it like that, which is horrible to do to people because it doesn't fit the natural means that the body usually develops its repertoire of 36 different manual physical movements that form the same repertoire we use for the actions of writing, by the way, which is totally natural to the body, and it happens and unfolds in beautiful developmental stages, just exactly as it needs to.
Yeah.
So people are already all able to make art, but they get taught that you don't do it that way, and then they stop because they think they're doing it wrong, which is not true. It's part of the horrible vestiges of the education system, which just hasn't known any better.
Maybe that's why I'm still stuck in stick figures.
Well, it's why a lot of people get stuck thinking, I'm not artistic, is what they say, which isn't, if they are able to write, it's not true. But it's understandable that people have come to think that because they've had people look at them and judge them and criticize what they're doing, because those people didn't know any better about how you elicit the visual arts and the sculptural arts, how natural it is to elicit those with people. So, yeah.
I think that's one you notice I'm biting my tongue, trying to wait my turn.
It's because I overtalk. I'm sorry.
Well, like many people with FASD, when I have a flash of brilliance, I want to get it out there, right? And I have to keep reminding myself, wait till she's done, wait till she's done, wait till she's done.
That's the hardest part.
And hope that I haven't lost the thought, which I have.
And we'll wait for a moment because we were talking about how the body naturally wants to show things. The body naturally wants to show things, and we get told, no, don't do it like
Yes. Okay. That is, you said a few minutes before that when we're talking with our child or our loved one, right? Not to ask questions or to comment on the quality of their drawing, right? And I think it's important to tie that together because our role is not to be an art critic, right?
That's so beautiful. I'm so glad you said that. That's of all the things said today, that's the gem right there, Patti.
Oh,
That's the gem. No, that's
flash
the
of
gem.
brilliance, momentary flash of brilliance.
Lots and lots of brilliance. All kinds of flashes all the time. All kinds of, as Jody would call it, all the glimmers, all kinds of. But it gives me chills when you say that, and it touches my heart so much because that is everything. We're not here to criticize who each other are. We're here to try and understand what is it you want me to understand about you, or your experience, or what's that like for you in that moment. And when people can show us, it's not for us to evaluate or critique. We're not grading any of this stuff. When kids do art, when families do art, it's not about right or wrong. Nobody grades anything. To throw all of that out, get that off of ourselves, because that has no business. Art is about letting something inside come out.
Yeah.
And whether it's a stroke on a pencil or a splash of paint on a wall, something is coming out. And what we want to do is appreciate what it looks like. What color is it? What shape is it? Is it next to another splash? So the kinds of questions we ask or the kind of observations we make, let's say we go back to that moment with the families where it's been 30 minutes and one person is done and ready to, and maybe they do another piece of art while the other person's still working, and families look at me and go, oh, am I supposed to be done? And I go, no, it's fine. It's fine. We got time here. You can do some more. Well, there'll be time for you to catch up. Don't worry about it. It's all good. You know, everybody works in their own way. So we get to the end of that, and then there's another half hour, and I say, does anyone want to say anything about their art? You want anyone to see it, or you want to keep it to yourself? What do you prefer? And someone will inevitably want to say, well, I did this because, and then they'll tell a story. Mm-hmm. Maybe the other person doesn't tell a story. They just look and they go, why is this next to that? Yeah. As we pick it apart and we just look at the art. We interview the art. Mm-hmm. We just look at the art and we interview it.
Interview the art.
Look at this. This part is next to that. Oh, this part's further away. Yeah. This part's further away. And if it's people, I mean, think about it. Yeah. If it's people, and you have some people close and you have other figures more distant, or you have some standing, some sitting, you have some showing certain expressions, others showing very little expression, others holding things or not holding things. There's a lot we can learn by just observing what we see without being sure what we're looking at yet. Yeah. It's okay to not know. What's this mean? No, we're interviewing the art to see what's there and allowing other people to let us come to know if there's a story with it.
Yeah. You know that I think at this point, I want to, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, Antonia, but so I've known for 4 years that I'm on the spectrum. What led me to figure it out was art, actually. When I was taking the year-long, I was taking a facets training. It was prior to the beginning of the year-long training session. Because if you want to get certified with facets, you have to go through the 18 hours first as just a general person, and then a year-long learning how to be a trainer. So, So one of the exercises that we do, and I've done this with many groups that I work with, is take a moment and visualize what your brain looks like when it's working. And then put it on paper. That's it in terms of direction. And I said a few moments ago, I'm stuck in stick figures, right? And yes, I have said I am not artistic. I do not say that I'm not creative.
There we go.
Because I do lots of creative things.
Yeah, you do.
But traditional artwork is it's never been my medium. So my brain drawing was basically the shape of the brain. And then I had asterisks for all my neurons that were firing for those momentary flashes of brilliance or the glimmers, right? And then the homework was to turn around and do this exercise with family members. And then from that, have discussions as a family about neurodivergence. Because that's when we really, as human beings, we have an internal focus, an internal frame of reference.
Yes,
we assume, and it's just human nature, we assume that the rest of the world thinks the way that we do, right? And it's through this exercise with a group of people who live very much like you do, come to realize that no two people conceptualize things the same way. Well, that's impossible because we all have very rich histories that are different one from the other. And so the exercise is meant to unfold this beautiful dialogue about how everyone is different and no one person is better than another, just different. And to start honoring neurodiversity, right? So, I mean, everyone watching or listening at this point knows my mother lives with us. She's got Lewy body dementia, so I'm her full-time caregiver. And but that means because she's here, she's my guinea pig. And where's she going to go? She's going to do my exercise. So, excuse me. And because she has always prided herself on her intellect, when she was done with her drawing, I started explaining the whole purpose of it, right? Which was kind of silly on my part, explaining because she has dementia. I have to laugh at myself. But the weird thing was her drawing. The only difference between her drawing and mine, and she had not seen mine,
oh my gosh,
was that she used X's instead of asterisks.
Oh my gosh, Patti. Oh my goodness.
Otherwise, it was the same conceptual framework.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that bizarre?
Well, it brings me to an observation, if I may. And the observation would be the thing about doing art exercises in workshops, as useful as this can be, is that one has to imagine that there will be such a range of responses to it. It can be a little hard if you're not trained as an art therapist. It can be a little hard to imagine how the unlikely events might occur. For example, we would expect that everyone in the family shows differences. In your case, what was the big shocker was the incredible similarities, which is like, now imagine if you had not been a social worker and trained in psychology and with the level of self-awareness and preparedness that you have for having conversations like this and for looking at that for yourself, the self-awareness you have, that imagine how complicated that could be for people who suddenly find themselves having things look very similar to someone they're uncomfortable with, or it can be very confusing. So part of the training for art therapy is, as people begin to use it, I usually recommend that people read up a little bit about and begin to do some exercises with art on their own, in the privacy of their own, at home for themselves, before they practice doing a lot with other people, before they facilitate it. For example, I might recommend for parents that give yourself a chance, for example, to take paints, colored pencils, and oil pastels. Have them available. Take a piece of paper, do 2 pictures. One picture would be, make one of the saddest things you can remember. Then make one of the happiest things you can remember. Portray it either abstract if you want, or with figures. It doesn't matter how you do it, but show that memory. And feel what happens in your body when you do it. Because that'll show you how incredibly connected one's body is to those emotions. And what happens when we let them show on a page or with sculptural materials, that can be really emotional moments. Those can be very emotional moments. And if we're not ready for them, if we don't know they're coming, we can be really taken aback and feel a little off balance, how to get the thing back in the jar. It's like the saying that art therapists are taught, it's, if people are like an egg, it's easier to crack someone open than put them back together again. We can't ever use art like a pair of pliers with someone else, because because what matters is that it be nourishing and supportive for the person first of all. We want art to be that safe container, that safe bucket where anything can come loose and people know that they're still going to be okay. They're going to get through it. And that's why I encourage people, when they begin to think about the utility of art, that they get used to doing those 2 examples. One of the saddest things they can remember, and one of the happiest things they can remember, just to get their bodies ready for how powerful art is. It's a big, powerful language.
So
it's
I want to put in the show notes one book that people can start with. When you said, I want parents, or spouses, whoever, I want people to read one book.
I will have to find a good citation and give you that. Because work. I think one of the most powerful things we can do is treat art as therapy, just doing it. And at the very least, that means that working with materials can always be an exploration and be safe, because it doesn't have to produce a product for anyone. It doesn't have to be something you can put on the refrigerator. It doesn't have to be someone else critiques. It can just be, I'm playing with the materials and seeing how it feels to my body. There's a woman who was an art therapist named Janie Ryan. And Janie Ryan's philosophy of art therapy, there are many philosophies and practices of art therapy. It's as diverse as oral counseling as a discipline, and as medicine as a discipline. You have neurologists, you have gastroenterologists, everybody's looking at a specific something. Art therapy is like that too. But there was a woman named Janie Ryan who talked about art as therapy. And I think we can always trust art, that art is a good holder for things that come out of the body. It's not always easy. It can be messy. But as long as we get ready and we know it's okay to be messy, it's not the end of the world if we make a mess. We're not going to be punished or sat in a corner or have someone come down on us because we spilled white paint. If we make a nice safe space for it, and then we unpack a little bit of art, it can be kind of like tasting a new food. We mess with it and see how we like it. And that's always kind of safe, as opposed to looking at it analytically. to start with.
Or go running with that analogy, trying a new food, that having a nice safe place to try that is very different from having a whole serving of it set before you with someone over, above us going, eat it.
Exactly. There we go. Well, did you like it?
Oh, yeah, give me more.
It's the texture. I don't like the, we might not even feel like we could say anything. But there we are. What we want to do is we want to avoid cornering people, and we want to provide something that can be of use to them, and something that they can explore gradually and gently, while it can also be a very powerful thing that brings us to understanding someone else's experience and maybe making a little code for that. I'm remembering a child who the bristle attacks became their code with their parent. The bullseye became the code for the case manager and this client. She would leave little Post-its for her case manager, and instead of checking in on a Likert scale, like how are your emotions, she would leave little pictographs for her case manager to check in how she was doing. And if it was a bullseye kind of day, that was not the day to have extra chores in the residence, to have to do a lot of stuff. It was one of those tough days for her. And so the dosing of everything that was expected would have to just be gentler, because it was just not, it was a harder day for her body. It was just a harder day.
And that's an important piece, that some days are easier and some days are harder. And that's just the way life works. And and if we can support each other, whether we're neurodiverse or neurotypical, we have those fluctuations. You said something interesting about how in families things can, the similarities can present themselves, as is the case with my conceptualization of my brain working and my mother's being pretty much identical. So are two of the other aspects of our creativity. We are both seamstresses and photographers.
Oh my gosh.
So, but and some of that makes sense, right? I mean, she taught me to sew when I was 8 years old.
Wow,
that's
wonderful.
The years that her second husband was part of our lives, that's all I did was sew.
Oh my gosh.
I missed junior high and high school and all the traditional activities. I spent those 5 years in the sewing room.
My goodness.
And as a result, I had a better wardrobe than any of my college professors.
No kidding. No kidding.
But and then with the photography, I do landscapes where she does close-ups.
Oh, how fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
But as she and I were talking,
the language of visual experience and code of communicating it, the means of communicating it, creativity is incredible. It brings me to think about, art materials. They're not just what we buy in an art supply store. They can be, it doesn't have to be an expensive thing that people go and do. We can reuse cardboard toilet paper tubes or paper towel tubes for sculpture. We can do all kinds of wonderful things with masking tape and paper and all kinds of household objects that can become part of found object materials. There was one child that this is really, it's really poignant how people select what they create with. But this child used a radio and undid the wires and refitted the wires to make an assemblage, and was describing how his brain worked using an assemblage, not a drawing.
What's an assemblage?
An assemblage is like a 3D collage.
Oh, okay.
Using physical objects, sculptured objects.
Yeah.
Putting together an assemblage, basically, an assemblage of stuff. So it's like a found object sculpture.
Okay.
And yeah, and he was describing what got stuck when he was trying to think. He'd get overwhelmed at school, and he would say, and when he did this assemblage, he had some blue areas that were connected with blue wires to a certain region, and they were sitting right on top, and then down under the casing of the old radio, there was a bunch of stuff that was tangled looking, different colors and things like that. And he said, this is the stuff I want to hold on to, and I get stuck in all of this.
Yeah.
So when people ask me for an answer, it's amazing how people can try and express to one another, this is what it's like.
Yeah.
And this is the part and when it works, and this is when it doesn't work so well for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And being able to get that across to someone means at least the other person has the opportunity to back off a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the beauty of describe your brain, when it's working, or describe your brain when, when you feel stuck, or when you're in a crowded environment, right? And you
I usually ask people to describe the environment or to describe what's happening with their body. I don't select the word brain very often. I usually say what's happening in your body, and what's happening out there, and what's happening in here.
Yeah,
I kind of go with that because it leaves me an opportunity to get at the stress symptoms in the body that have to do with the processing, but they start out as things like nausea in the stomach. Here's another thing that the art conveyed that was rather interesting. Many children will get stuck with a gnawing or a tense sensation in their stomach. And when they're little kids, people will say, are you hungry? Sometimes it's not always hunger, it's anxiety.
Yeah.
But if people have always said, are you hungry? Children will learn to decode it as I'm hungry.
Yeah.
When it may not be hunger, it may be stress, it may be anxiety, it may be apprehension, it may even be anger. It could mean many things, but their stomach isn't happy. Yeah. So we can have them picture, you don't feel so good? What's that look like? What's that look like? What's happening in your body? Yeah. And then when we go to the body, and the reason I bring that up is because there was an example in a book years ago. It was a well-intended example of having a child make a gingerbread outline figure and then put different emotions in their body, but put them in different colors and all over and it didn't allow the children to make their body and show the stress in their body their way. Yeah. It was a teacher trying to say, here, use this, so she could find out what the word feelings were. And that doesn't help the kid correctly know where stress builds up.
Because it's different for all of us.
Thank you. Yeah. And it's not about the words, it's about where do things become stuck? Yeah. And how bothersome does it get in the body that gets distracting from thinking about anything else? Because like the client who was sitting in my office who was not deeply breathing, she was so stressed, she couldn't deeply breathe. After she made that first bullseye, she did that because she could actually take a deep breath. Her shoulders were frozen. She was sick to her stomach. She was so physically stressed, she couldn't take a deep breath.
Yeah. And
it was horrible for her.
Some people would have anxiety in the pit of their stomach, where other people would have butterflies up here.
Or a choking feeling in their throat.
Yeah.
Or they'd have a feeling of ringing in their ears, or they'd have a massive headache, like a lightning storm in the head. It's going to be different in every person's body because their system is unique. Yeah. As you have said so many times, another one of your pieces of brilliance, when you've met one person, you've met that one person with FASD.
I wish I could take credit for that flash of brilliance, but it's not mine.
Well, but you invoked it at the right moment, so it's still brilliant. I
Oh,
still think it's brilliant because you are able to bring it early and often, and
yeah,
people need to understand this.
yeah,
It's so
yeah,
important, especially when we see all the checklists of the behavior. When I go back
yes.
to where people are in our bodies, as
Mm,
families, as adults living with this, the
yeah,
information that's useful to us is what's off track in my
yeah,
body and what do I do to make myself feel better,
yeah.
and how do I get that across to somebody, and is someone going to accept it and help
That's a
me,
big question.
and and tolerate that I'm stuck here until I
Mhm.
can get unstuck. What can they do to help unstick? Maybe there's nothing they can do. Maybe they can leave me in peace.
Yeah,
As you said, turning, turning away and going ahead and regrouping is a perfectly wonderful situation. Imagine how differently that comes across to an anxious parent. I'm talking to you. Don't you take this seriously? Where are you going? Wait, don't turn your back on me. Ooh,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
wait. The person isn't
yeah.
meaning to shut you out. They're meaning to shut off what's
The
overwhelming.
world.
And
Mhm.
if you can have a code between the two that says, I need my safe space, I'll come back.
Mhm.
You build code around the withdrawing or the
Mhm.
coming back together.
Mhm.
These are the things that make life much more manageable
Yeah,
than if we misunderstand and we think, oh, we're
yeah,
being cut off, or,
yeah,
oh, someone's doing this at me. Well, they're
yeah,
not doing it at you. They're doing it for them.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
a big difference.
I so
A
it
huge
could
difference.
be, and that's a very important point I want to follow up on, Antonia, because that code must be honored,
Yeah,
and that code must never become a way of shaming the other person.
that's so right.
For instance, if I were to say, I'm taking 5,
Yeah,
that's very different from take 5,
that's so,
right?
so good. So
I,
good.
I have to chuckle in a past life, um, in a disagreement, um, I would hear, you need to check your sugar because you're just acting stupid right now.
Oh, ouch. Yeah, yeah.
Imagine, and I just stayed quiet because that's what I've always done. But you can imagine everything that was swirling around in my mind
Oh,
that
I
wanted to
physically
come
feel
out.
that one for you. I'm like, "Ugh." I physically feel it in my stomach. I'm like, ooh, la
But that was,
la la la.
there is a connection between when our brains are starved of glucose, it doesn't process well. And the things that we do and say might come across as really off base.
And likewise, when people realize that someone else is having a hard time,
Mhm.
we can learn not to shame them about it. We can say, oh, just a second, I got to back off. I see this isn't a good moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a lot more constructive. It takes away, it removes from the relationship contempt. And
Yes. Yes.
as we know from some of the beautiful research by Gottman, anytime there's contempt, and they're talking about in marriages, but this could
Mhm.
be between a child and a parent as well. Anytime the other person experiences contempt or
Mhm.
disgust because of how we've interacted with them, it's really corrosive to their ability to the trust between the two people.
Yeah.
It's excruciating, and
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
inadvertently causing harm.
Yeah.
We're not intentionally abusing the other person, but it is harmful.
Yeah.
And so that harm, we can dial that down, we can pull that back, but we have to pull it
Yeah.
apart by
Yeah.
understanding that
And
it's a mechanism that hasn't worked, and we
mhm.
need something to
Mhm.
replace it with. We have to stop action
Yeah.
to try and dial down the harm.
Yeah. And I think
We don't inadvertently want to hurt each other. We don't.
the other beautiful thing about being able to do that, being able to recognize when the other person is struggling,
Really stuck.
is is in a relationship, whether it's marital, parent, child, friends, whatever, behavior so very often is not personally directed at one another, but reflecting how well our minds are functioning in the moment. And if we have a stuck spot, if we have a bristle attack, it's not a personal thing. And for the other person, and it takes wisdom for the other person to be able to say, to recognize, oh, this is a bristle attack. Oh, this is a medical issue unfolding before me. Oh, this is a, whatever the case.
Could be a panic. It could be a panic attack. It could be shut down, but it's a physical stress state. It's a state of physical stress.
To give that grace is a very loving action. And it brings unity against whatever the threat is.
That's so valuable. It's so valuable. It puts you on the same team.
Yes.
It puts you on the same team.
Yeah.
You can both be trying to dial down stress instead of imagining that one or the other is to blame for it.
Right.
And that's a really different frame. It's a different lens. And I think that's what families look for when they're trying to understand the physical difference of their child. Yeah. And it's what we look for when we're trying to understand how to go back and forth with each other as friends or with each other as partners. It's human to want to say, if I can know more about where the other person is and not take it personally, then we don't have to make mountains out of molehills here.
Right. But I think part of the problem, I think part of it in modern life, we have, excuse me, and I think the internet and computers actually augment the problem, create the mountain where it used to be a molehill, right?
It can be.
Because we can now do so much, because these machines do so much for us and speed everything up, that our to-do lists are miles longer than they were 50, 60 years ago.
And our expectations of one another are that other people have to keep up, because the rapid back and forth, if they're not keeping, come on, keep up. It's even meant as a humorous thing anymore. But the notion of all of this gets worse in speeded environments. Mm-hmm. If we take that back to what happens when families are coming to counseling, or when individuals are coming to counseling, part of what's different about living in a body with neurodivergence is speeded environments can help at sometimes and hurt at other times, depending on how our body is doing, whether it's in the just right place, whether we're fatigued that day, whether the load got too big, the dose got too big, the intensity was too big. It ends up back in all those factors again. And we, like it or not, we humans are one of the first layers of environment that the other person, the other individual encounters.
Yeah.
So we take that load.
And we must, and we must realize, when we consider that other people might be stuck, they might be anxious, they might not feel well, they might be in the midst of a bristle attack. It might have to do with the pressure they feel for all the things on their plate. Yeah. Right. And where they need us to be a source of compassion. They need us to be a source of strength and a partner, whether it's marital, parent, child, friends, whatever. Yeah. That's part of not taking things personally, because if I myself tend to come unglued when I'm super stressed, well, of course, the same thing for my mother, my husband, my friends, my coworkers. Yeah. We all have to be willing to give each other the grace that we so crave for ourselves.
It's beautifully said. And I think for people who live I'm thinking about the philosophy behind that, and how some people call it grace from a spiritual point of view, or from a faith-based point of view. Other people might call it mindfulness. Other people might call it taking a break. If they're in sports, they'd take a breather, take a break. Mm-hmm. There are many ways that the team can frame how that works to
Yeah.
work that into their code.
Yeah.
But it's such a valuable concept.
Well,
And
for me, grace is not
such a
just
great concept.
the permission to make mistakes, right? Grace is the equipping,
Yeah.
right? And yes, I do use that word from a spiritual frame of reference, right? When God gives us grace, he's equipping us for that which he has called us to do. No, it's giving us whatever it is that we need. And how can we not do that for each other?
So then for people who are not from a religious point of view, they would want to know, how can we practice the kindness? If the religion of love is kindness, if when we're taking it out of religious context actually and saying, if a principle, a human principle we could all engage in is kindness, how can we extend kindness to the readiness to consider someone else's in a different perspective than we are? Someone else is experiencing a different moment than we are in a human body. You know, we wonder that. So for me, the easiest place to find all of that was in the art, and then I could find it in words. But the things I learned from the art and the things people could show me, the way I could understand, it was so practical, it was so efficient. In the same way that sign language is so, it's efficient because it's so expressive. You can see it and you can sense it. And that's sometimes different, because people with words, they can say, I'm fine. And we know they're not fine at all.
Yeah.
But what are they?
Yeah.
And the words may happen or they may not, but it's hard. It's hard sometimes to figure all that out. Little kids, it's hard.
You know, I was just listening to something. I think it may have been in that book that you had mentioned that I'm reading for a future episode. There was a discussion of our smile and our tone of voice is very different if it is sincere versus painted on for appearance sake, right? And you demonstrated that a moment ago when you said, I'm fine. That was a very different smile than your genuine smile, right? And the book I was listening to, because I listen, almost all my reading is done on Audible.
Super.
Yes, my book will eventually get onto Audible, but you know what it was saying was, in that those two different smiles, they actually use different muscles.
Yeah, they do.
One from the other.
The zygomatic display versus the rest.
Yeah.
Absolutely true.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's why intonation is so important. You know, the words that are used are but a tiny fraction of communication.
Yeah.
You know, it is visual, it is tonal.
Huge.
And,
and it's gestural in terms of how big or small. There's a good example from we can talk about it in terms of the auditory world. We could also talk about it in terms of the signing world. You can sign. Well, I'll just show you. You can say, or you can say, one is, oh, I like her. The other is, don't like her. I actually signed, oh, I like her, but I had irony of gesture. So it conveys same sign, completely different message. So we see how much of communication is comportamental. It's in the whole body. It's in the whole body. It's the energy we feel coming from the whole body, which is why art is such a great container, is because it's a good place to put it. Before we share it somewhere else, it at least fills this intermediate spot.
And I think that's
bucket.
And I think that's a beautiful way to wrap things up, Antonia, because we've been going for about an hour and a half. Nice long session, but terrific
You'll have to edit.
discussion. Terrific discussion. And so I'm looking forward to our next one and our next discussion of PYP. And you
Okay.
can update everyone as to how that project is going. And so for those of you who did not catch the last discussion, PYP is Antonia's upcoming book, Parenting Your Porcupine. And I am honored to be one of the previewers. And it is such a gem. It's going to be on my list of, this is something absolutely everybody should read.
Thank you.
Anyway, we'll
for
get
helping
more
me with-
into that on another episode, but for now, I wanted to invite everyone to hop on over to patreon.com, patreon.com. There is, if you go patreon.com/living with FASD podcast. So I have a community over there, and which is free. And I also do have, though, 3 different levels of sponsorship. And it's all it's $5 a month, $10 a month, $15 a month. Even that higher $15 a month is less than the cost of 1 cup of coffee a month. If you go to Starbucks, it's probably the cost of 3 cups of coffee. It's probably cheaper than that. But what that will do is it will help me cover the costs of putting this podcast out, which, it's been just about a year now. I want to keep going. I very much want to keep going. But
Birthday to the podcast. Happy birthday to
Yes.
the podcast. Happy birthday to the podcast.
Yeah, just about.
Happy birthday to the podcast. Yeah. It's
been an incredible year. So
it's an amazing podcast. I love the episodes. I love learning from other people and your wonderful style of asking these great questions and having a wonderful lineup of different folks with different important things to say about their experiences. It's so valuable.
Yeah,
it's so valuable.
Thank you. So yeah, if people want to pop on over there, patreon.com/living with FASD podcast, any support would be very appreciated. But again, not necessary. The content of the podcast will always be free to anyone that wants to watch or listen to it. That's just my commitment to the FASD community. So
amazing.
But that is there, and it's we've been going at it for a while, so we need to take a break. But Antonia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Patti.
I'm so excited to get this episode out to everybody. And everyone, thank you for your time today. Come on back next Monday for another episode of Living with FASD. Take good care and have a fabulous week.